Good News Productions International presents Venture in Faith. Inspiring testimonies from Christians of all ages, telling how God has worked in their lives.
Our special guest today is Wayne Smith, and we're going to be giving some encouragement to those of you who may be having a little difficulty in your life right now. Wayne, I heard you say on the radio yesterday that, tell us about this article in the Lookout.
Boyce, in January of 1997, Dr. Terry Mattingly, teacher of communications at Milligan College, wrote a fine article in the Lookout. And he said that 1,300 ministers are fired every month in America. Now, he was not speaking of Christian ministers as such. He was talking about Christian churches, Lutheran churches, Baptist churches, so on. He also stated that there's a 65% increase in divorce in the parsonage in the last 25 years. And to me, the worst statistic is the fact that in 10 years, 40% of the paid Christian workers will be out of it. Now, there could be, many reasons for that, such as salary and various things. However, I'm not sure a whole lot of grace was involved in firing 1,300 ministers, and I'm sure that we would agree that sometimes we bring those things on ourselves. But I'm not sure that others are as have as much grace as they should for those who live in a fishbowl, such as we do. But I've felt, Boyce, that the greatest tool of Satan is discouragement. We don't pay a lot of attention to it because, if a person committed some tremendous sin, I would say, no wonder he's not in the ministry any longer, or they're discouraged. But you just have to fight discouragement. And so I've tried to do that myself. I fortunately have had a sense of humor and a good forgetter. And so as I've gone along in my ministry, I'm as human as anyone else. And those who can be high can also be low, you see. Now, my wife is she goes along steady. She doesn't get real excited, nor does she ever get real low. So she's a good meat to help meet for me. So I've tried my very best to encourage other ministers, and the most famous sermon, we were talking about that I've ever preached is playing hurt. And we have to do that. And if we don't play hurt, it's like, I've always preached that every Super Bowl Sunday, and I have an athlete in the pulpit with me, and they can tell you, their knees are bandaged, they're really in sometimes really bad shape, but they have to go out there. And if they don't play hurt, why they don't play at all. And the people in life, hurt by adultery, alcohol, gambling, incest, just going down the line. And here they are out in the world trying to serve Jesus. And they have enough that would knock the average person down. So trust in the Lord with all thine ways, acknowledge him. It's really a matter of trust, and I've been in that situation. I've just said, Lord, I'm in a corner, and I can't go around it. I can't go under it. I can't go over it, and I'm going to have to put it on you. Come unto me, all you that labor heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And sometimes we're like Christian atheists. We say, well, I believe that, but I don't believe it. I believe he can help boys, but boy, Lord, you ought to know what is my problem. So
now, you've only had 2 ministries, is that right?
Right.
And
right.
I know you weren't fired from this last. You were 40 years at the same church.
Yes. Well, when you're not asked to go anyplace else, it's pretty easy to stay.
And you were 7 years at the...
7 years my first church.
7 years the first. Did they fire you?
No. It was in the country, and strictly in the country. In my first year there, we averaged 31. And boys, I can tell you that I was just as thrilled then as I am today. I've never had a real high opinion of myself as far as any talents are concerned. Having flunked 3 subjects my first 2 years of high school would give one the impression that I'm not some intellectual giant. And so just to be in the ministry, to feel that I'm serving the Lord was, and I never felt the Lord was fortunate to have me. I'm not trying to be humble. I'm just saying that I really have always felt honored to preach the gospel.
Well, how were you selected to go down into the ministry at Southland?
I was in this rural church, and an elder in the Broadway Christian Church said, I know of a young man down in the country that's doing a good job. I was 27 years old. And IBM was coming to Lexington, Kentucky. And it was the South End was growing, so they said, we need a church out there. And they did a lot of things right. They did one thing sort of wrong. They purchased just about 2 or 3 acres of ground. But they built a brand new building, brick building, poured basement, everything. Seat 110 people for $28,500. And then they brought me, and from March, April, May, and June, church started in July. But those 4 months, I didn't do anything but call. I went door to door with a leaflet, pamphlet, said we're going to start church. Then the opening Sunday, July the 8th, 1956, we had 152 people, and one time we dropped under that, but we kept going up. But I met with the Broadway elders. They said, come up and meet with us, and I did. And they all looked like the average age was 81. You know what I mean? Boys to a young man. And I was scared to death, so I said, you don't want me. And I said, I told them a couple other ministers that I thought were very good. I said, we don't want them, we want you. So I came, and that first year was tough because in the country, I did all the work, but whatever Wayne said went. But in the city, they helped me. They were strong workers, but I had strong eldership, which is good, I felt like I was under them, always have. So we got up around 200, and we went to 5 basements for Sunday school rooms because we were right in a subdivision. And then we doubled the size of the church, and then we built a larger building. Then we decided that we'd start a church, and we gave 123 members and called Wally Rendell, which was now 26 years ago, and he averages 1,000. Wonderful, wonderful church, Southern Acres Christian Church. And then we decided we need more property, so 5 miles away, we bought 20 acres, and when we moved out there, we left a church behind of over 300 people, and called Hill and Dale Christian Church, and now they average a little over 1,100. So then we just kept growing.
And Southland, the last year you were there?
My last quarter I was there, we averaged 41.25 in our 3 services on Sunday morning. Now, for the year, we averaged 37.61. And just before I left, we started another church called East Side Christian Church. It really was a church that had gone down to 19. It was in a nice location, good building. And they said, if you'll pay our bills, well, you can have it. So we paid $50,000 worth of bills and put a new roof on it and hired a new minister. And they're doing probably 150, 200. But for the my last year, we averaged 37.61. So I felt the need, because of some poor health, that I should retire. And I encouraged them to go and check several men. They said, no, we'll just get tapes. So they got tapes, and the one that they chose and I chose, I really just asked him to come and speak because I couldn't move my leg. Psalms 119:71. It was good for me that I've been afflicted, that I might learn thy statutes. Now, you know, that's powerful, boys. It was good for me that I've been sick, that I might learn thy statutes. We don't learn the issues of life at the beach. We learn them at the funeral home. We learn them at the church. We learn them at the hospital. And so he came, and when he came, the ball game was over. He preached that morning, and my friends called me and said, "Now, Wayne, we don't want you to leave, but," you know. And I didn't hear him till that afternoon on the radio, and it was marvelous, marvelous. And then we're on television, have been for 12 years for 1 hour on Sunday morning, goes to exactly one half the state. And so I heard him the next Sunday, and it was great. So then they decided, well, how long between ministers? And they decided to get, they called it a grieving period. You know, because I could name you some of our churches that minister. I remember one church, the minister's there 15 years, next minister there 1 year. Another minister on the West Coast, 30 years. Next minister there 1 year. So they decided 5 months. Well, then he came back and preached another time. They put it down to 2 months. Then he preached another time. They put it down to 3 weeks. And our youth minister said 20 minutes of grieving would have been plenty, you know. But, boys, there's no way I can explain it other than the Holy Spirit. But 3 weeks after I left, they had 1,714 more. And
you'd already started another church too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he has been there 2 years, and they've now averaged a little over 5,200, and it was 37 something when I left. And they've made a lot of changes, some that people like, you know, mainly music, drama, things of this nature. We had one style of music for 40 years, and that was Southern gospel, and that's what I liked. But there's no doubt about it that contemporary Christian music is in vogue and fine. So,
well, Wayne, tell us about some of the physical problems you've gone through.
Well, I've had 7 operations, and I'd just love to tell you about them, you know. And
a car wreck.
And a car wreck. Yeah, I've been in good health between, you know, operations, but my then I had this bad car wreck, and I was in the hospital 29 days and out of the ministry for 4 months in a cast, and I'll tell you, those times really make you appreciate your blessings. And the most unusual operation I had, the last one I had was a total knee replacement, and I'd like to tell you it was an old football injury, or I'd like to tell you I was on my knees praying too much, but it was probably weight. But the most unusual operation I had was 1971 at the Baptist Hospital, and it was back surgery. The doctor said, "Wayne, we've got to get some weight off you, so we're going to put you on 500 calories a day." Boys, do you know how much 500 calories a day is? It's nothing. The biggest McDonald's hamburger is 600 calories. Now you slice 100 off of that, and then slice that 3 ways, morning, noon, and night, and it's nothing. And I learned for the first time why hospitals put a lid on their food. It's not to keep it warm. They're ashamed of it. Everything I had for 500 calories a day, everything I had on my plate shook. It was just terrible. So then he said, "Wayne, I want you to start walking up to 9 miles a day." Well, I'm from Cincinnati, and Pete Rose and I graduated from the same high school, and you can bet on that. Okay. Thought I'd just throw that in. So I'm not used to walking in it. So I started walking around Lexington. After you walk 2 or 3 miles, why people would pick you up, and I didn't want to hurt their feelings. So I kind of went. So I thought, where can I walk that I won't be tempted? So I decided to walk to the next town on the railroad. And I know I could have walked 4.5 miles and 4.5 back, but it was a greater victory, conquest, to feel as I'd walked. And I had a friend there to pick me up. And I was going down the railroad track one day, boys, and saw those 2 drunks who were so inebriated. They were going down the railroad track, thought they were going up steps. And one said to the other, "Boy, these steps are close together." The other one said, "I don't mind these close steps, but these low handrails are killing my back." But anyway, through sickness, why, you can certainly learn to to get close to the Lord. And that's why I preach that sermon, and I try to live that sermon of playing while you're hurt. And 1 Peter 4:12, think it not strange when fiery trials come upon you. When you go into the blood center, you don't come out and say, I'll never go again. Why? Well, they took my blood. That's what they're supposed to do. And when you're in the ministry and you're living Christian life, you're going to be hurt. People don't intentionally try to do it sometimes, but we're in the flesh and we're imperfect. Psalms 15, who may dwell in my sanctuary, who may live on the holy hill. He who keeps his oath, even when it hurts. So if you live for Jesus, Satan is going to see that you have some obstacles. And now, one reason I stayed 40 years is because I had some other calls. But I think to know the will of God, you have to have three things lined up together. Inward feeling, Scripture, and open doors. Now, I remember a fine church that wanted me, and it was more money and all that business. But and the Scripture was there. It wouldn't hurt to go there to preach. And the door was open, but there was no inward feeling. So I think you have to get those three things. And I never did have that with any place. So, but Southland, and I loved Southland. They were good to me, and the church grew, and so I felt like that was. But I really never thought about it that I would try to be there, a certain number of years.
Tell me about the full-page ads that you would run in the paper to be the conscience of the community.
Thank you. I think the effort and the mission of the church ought to be to win souls. Number one, to build up the saints, edify, educate the saints, discipleship, and then thirdly, be the conscience of the community. And there's no doubt about it that Southland was the strongest church in that, and others now have joined in also. But, that was on capital punishment. Two men broke out of the courthouse and stole a car and ran out of gas out in the country in front of an Episcopal minister's home. And they went in and killed his 14-year-old son, 16-year-old daughter, and clubbed the dog to death. They stole his car, went to Falmouth, Kentucky, and just didn't even go in a motel, just shot in the rooms and killed 3 people. Well, they were both tried and convicted and sent to the prison, and they both died in prison. They call that sidewalk justice when they die in prison. But I was so inflamed by that I decided to preach on restore capital punishment because I believe it's in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. And so a doctor and a CPA in the church said, if you'll write that up, why, we'll buy a page in the paper. Of course, as you know, boys, it's a whole lot easier to preach a sermon than to write it up, because when all the people read this, you have to have the right thing. So that I still have copies of that. And but there were many other issues. Madonna's books were at the library, the lottery, extending the bars. They wanted to stay open to 4 o'clock instead of closing at 1 o'clock. There's always I believe it's called the Nor plant, when they took our tax money to put something underneath the skin of girls so they could have sex 5 more years without becoming pregnant. And of course the big issue is abortion. That's one of the biggest. I don't know if people realize that you can leave half of your estate to an unborn child, which sort of belies the fact that our government says and people say that it's not a child. It is a child, wonderfully made.
What did these full-page ads do for the church itself?
Well, it really helped our church. Now, I must be honest and tell you that I was surprised by that. We wound up with a number of doctors, over 30 lawyers, 2 judges, and former Governor John Y. Brown and Miss America that he married. And it surprised me, the strong stand that we took, that caliber of people went along with that. Now, I probably was selling them a little short, that they probably believed in a number of those things also. But on the other hand, after a number of years, with a minister. You like him, you know. And so I did get by with some things that I should have, and sometimes I shouldn't have. I've said some things that I probably should have said, but that's Wayne. You know, see what I mean? So ministers need to learn, if they can stay there long enough and get over that hurdle and that people love you, why, you can get by with it.
Tell us about your 20th anniversary.
Well, on our 20th anniversary, we had it out at the picnic at this elder's farm, and I thought there was an unusually large crowd there, but I was ignorant of what they were going to do. So out of the barn, they brought a gold-colored Cadillac, brand new Cadillac, and bicycles for my 2 girls, diamond ring for my wife, refrigerator, carpet. They had some money left over, so they bought all that, and 20 pounds of chocolate peanuts in the front seat in a plastic bag, because my favorite food is chocolate peanuts, and 1 for each year. Well, you know, I thought I'd gone to heaven, you know, with a Cadillac and 20 pounds of peanuts. And the church has been so good to me. And then on my 30th anniversary, it just so happened that's when I had that wreck. And it was a near fatal wreck. And I was in my wife's Honda, so the church said they didn't want me to be in a small car again. So on the 30th, they gave me a new Lincoln. And so that's been a blessing. And I think more churches ought to do that.
But now, here we began by talking about 1,300 ministers getting fired every month in the United States of America. What's the difference, Wayne? How come the church there at Southland has loved you so much and you've loved them? Explain that.
Well, first of all, I make mistakes, and I would apologize. And I've met some ministers that are never wrong. And I don't know whether that's just ignorance or ego or what it is. But if you will stand before your board and say, man, I made a mistake, I got carried away and said something in a sermon or something, and I'm sorry about it, that puts a tremendous burden on them. That when they get out of line, just like an elder one time resigned, he said, I've got a bad attitude. It's not Wayne's fault, it's not your fault, it's my fault. Well, where do they get that impetus for saying that? I think they get it from the preacher. And then another thing, boys, I'm sort of surprised that ministers don't know how to get along with people more. I mean, let them win sometimes. You don't always have to win. And they may be right, you know. But if you've rubbed a person the wrong way, go by his office. Talk to him. Become his friend. You just can't run off everybody that you don't like. And first of all, I'm not even sure you're supposed to do that. That's their church. That's why they're elders, because you can get up and leave at any minute, leave them with a debt of $500,000 or something like that. But, you know, I had some men that I said one time, privately, I said, now Jesus loves everybody, but I don't. Now, that wasn't really true. But I'd go by this fellow's office just to, you know, hey, how you doing, you know.
I heard you say one time that it's wrong to hate, but if it ever gets right, you've got a list.
I got a list, that's right. Yeah, you're right. But you know, surely you can tell when you've rubbed someone the wrong way. And I remember an elders meeting one time, and I took a real strong stand on something, and I went to these 2 elders, and I said, did I rub you? And one of them said, no, disagree. The other one said, yes. And I said, okay, let's sit down. IBM had a theory that they sort of knew when a machine was going to break down, and they replaced it, called preventative maintenance. And I think in the church, surely you have enough of a feel after a while to know who's unhappy and go to that person, preventative maintenance. And if I had some big issue coming up, I would try to set the stage for that and talk to people that I thought might be against it and explain it, you see. So that way our church really didn't grow real fast, but I thought it was solid, and I think the fact that it didn't go down later, I hope it was.
Yeah, tell us about your bypass surgery, because that was kind of preventative maintenance.
Yes, when I went to speak
Yeah.
in Denver, in Colorado, I was a speaker for the convention of the Christian churches in Colorado, and Dick Crabtree picked me up in Denver, and then he took me, that's a mile high, and then he took me to Breckenridge to speak, and that's 2 more miles. And I got out of the car, I was deathly sick, and I spoke 4 times, and 2 of the times I had to sit down, and I said, don't sing that song, Lord, lead me on to higher ground. And so I thought it was the height. And so when I got back to Lexington, I wrote my host out there and said, why don't you have this convention where normal people live? And so he wrote and said that Brother Nofel Staten had been there the year before and had fainted, and he had heart problems. So they suggested that day I called Dr. Park in our church, an elder, heart cardiologist, and he put me on a treadmill the next day, and I failed it. So that was really a blessing. Saved me having a heart attack to go out there. And that's why my favorite verse, boys, in all the Bible that's kept me going in the ministry, because if you can get high like I do with laughter, you can get low. But my favorite is Romans 8:28, that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Now, what people don't understand is it says all things. That wreck that I had, I do not believe that was God intended, but God used that, you see. Matter of fact, he really used, they put pews in the balcony while I was out. I thought, well, the church is going to stop. They said, Wayne, you better get well. We're going on without you here, you know. So all things work together for good. And I've had some down times and misunderstandings, things like that. But if you really believe that, Lord, I'm sure anxious to see how this is going to work out, you know, why that God will take care of you.
Wayne, talk to us about entering through gates made of pearls.
It's my understanding that a pearl is really this sort of a shell of an oyster that's been pierced, and there's a healing ointment that a fluid that comes in and heals that, and it becomes a pearl. I'm not giving the most scientific explanation here, but a pearl is a healed wound. And had there not been any irritation or piercing and so on, there wouldn't be a pearl. And so it's interesting that when we go to heaven and go through those gates of pearl, those that go there are those that have made it through irritation and adjustment and heartache and all those things. Go through gates of pearl. And I think that's why it's called that, you see. I really have an admiration. And I put myself against, when I complain maybe about an operation or something that is going wrong, I think about Charles, a little boy born, really brilliant boy, but all one side of his face was a birthmark. His mother regretted the day he'd go to school because children are cruel. Came home the first day of school crying. Well, what's wrong, Charles? Well, they made fun of my face. She said, if you study hard, you can be respected as an educator. And later, when Dr. Charles Eliot retired as president of Harvard, he said one of the best days of his life when the mother said, some things you can change and some things you can't change, and work on those gifts that you have. Now, what I'm saying is that there's so many people that have gone so far beyond me who didn't have the chance I have, or, 2 eyes to see the sunsets glow, 2 ears to hear what I know, 2 feet to take me where I go. Oh, God, forgive me when I whine. I'm blessed indeed, the world is mine. My wife's favorite passage of scripture is complaining displeases the Lord. And she really believes that it's just sinful, to complain. the longest field goal in the history of football. 63-yarder was kicked by a boy with half a foot. I got a lot of those illustrations. So, but and I'd say, hey, if that guy can do it with half a foot, and I might just throw into one of my greatest motivations in the ministry is the cults. I don't see, as I travel every week, and I don't see the Moonies, people like that, in airports like I used to. Matter of fact, I don't see them at all anymore. But I think, boys, if they can do it with what they have, couldn't we do it with the gospel? What is our defense? What is our excuse? And if I couldn't outwork and outdo those people, I'd be ashamed. I don't want to be a loser, and I feel that there's some heights that I cannot reach, like in teaching in a Bible college and things like that intellectually, but I can work, and I'll tell you what, you can cover up a whole lot of weaknesses with hard work, And let me throw this into, if any young preachers are watching, I've never thought you get really a lot of extra points preaching. People expect you to do that. That's your job. But when you're there when mother dies, and you're there in emergency, you're there when you don't have to be there, people will remember that. That's a kindness, love, And love's what it's all about. I just learned recently that love is not only a noun, but a verb and action. And you may pity people in a nursing home, and you may think about them, but you don't love them unless you're doing something for them. And then love without a plan is a wish. You've written several books. I haven't written any. I thought I'd mention that to you. Dave Stone, assistant minister down at that big church in Louisville, said, "Have you ever read one?" I never did like him either, But lost my train of thought here.
I heard you give a message on power. Was that the North American Christian
Yes,
Convention? And
yeah.
One of the illustrations you used was this dear lady that had so many problems at home. Don't you remember that story or not? She's carrying.
Mrs. Allison. And of course, power is in prayer, But behind that, you have to have a salvation experience, that you know that Jesus has come in your heart, and the blood of Christ has made you whole. And I'd go visit her. She was blind, and I'd go away just weeping. I'd say, "Wayne, she was praising God, it just really." And here I am complaining, and that's why hospitals, the minister that doesn't go to the hospitals loses something. You need to go and see on a regular basis those who are worse off than you are, And sometimes when I was really upset about something, I'd go to the hospital. Not that I really enjoy it that much, but after you visit the hospital a while, if you don't come out saying, "Hey, I'm in good shape," why, there's something wrong with you,
Well, tell us what you're doing now after you retired from 40 years.
Right. For the last 2 years and 3 months, I've been just, I'm with Dan Muter now over here at Pittsburgh, Kansas. And I flew in Saturday, and I was there Sunday through Wednesday, then going home Thursday. Then I'm home Thursday night, Friday, then I fly to Kansas City on Saturday, and I'm with this church at St. Joe, Missouri, and I do that. Now, I've been surprised at the number of requests I've had, so I've really sort of overbooked and haven't, but I do have some time this summer to do this. But I enjoy it, but I do want to mention that it was a year and 9 months after I left before I went back, and I designed it that way, but also I had a cancellation. Church wanted me to hold a meeting in their new building and wasn't ready. So on that September Sunday, I went back for the first time. I just felt as though that the second wife doesn't really like the first wife hanging around the house. although Mr. Bro has been very generous, asked me to preach twice, but I don't want to preach. I mean, those people heard me for 40 years. But it was a little hard to, there's a lot of roots there, and that wasn't real easy. But I'm glad I went back, and I would have gone back another time. I was in the hospital. I thought I was having some heart problems.
And the elders were ushering?
Yeah. Yeah, they had 2,000 more that Sunday than when I left. They had 5,800. When I left, we had 3,800. And I was just lucky to get a seat. So I saw these elders ushering. Well, elders never ushered when I was there. That was deacons' jobs and things like that. So I said to Mr. Mossberger, one of our finest elders, buddy, elders didn't have to usher when I was here. Well, he said, Wayne, we didn't need this many ushers when you were here. So, of course, I always try to get jokes on them, and so when they can pour it on me, why, they enjoy.
Did you one time pass out bubble gum at a board meeting?
I always passed out candy at an elders meeting. We never had a limit on our elders and deacons. If they were qualified, put them on. We had 113 on the board when I left, 41 of those elders. And I was telling Dan Muter the other day that, some of those men, like some attorneys and everything, they had just come from the office. So, and I'll tell you what, you make bad decisions on an empty stomach. So I always had candy laid out there, and the men really appreciate it. But I also did that sometimes board me, but for 113 men, that's. But no, we always had fruit at a board meeting. We had normally a bushel of apples, box of apples, a box of grapes, things like that, for the men as they came in today. Because, but you know what? There's another thing that ministers can do. People are so good to give to ministers, and I always, whenever I went out of town, I always brought back a little gift for the wife of the chairman of the elders and the wife of the chairman of the board, just a little something. And my wife gets on me about this food. Of course, as you know, I'm overweight. And she said, Wayne thinks food will cure everything, even obesity. But it's just the idea of gift, And then I tried to keep it lighthearted. I'd always try to have a joke or something, but I can get serious too.
Wayne, we're out of time.
Oh, really?
And I want you to kind of look in the eye of somebody that may be going through a discouraging moment and tell them to be faithful unto death and hang on.
Yeah. Well, he that endureth to the end, the same shall be saved. And we don't want to get this close to the Holy Land and departure and do anything like Solomon near the end of his life, sort of foul things up. The most famous painting in the world is Mona Lisa. It hung in a gallery in Paris from 1899 to 1912, 13 years. Hundreds of people came through to see it. Then it was stolen for 2 years and returned in 1914. This may be hard to believe, but more people stood in line those 2 years it was missing to look at the vacant place on the wall than all the people the previous 13 years. And Boyce, you know why, and I know why, and everybody watching knows why. We really don't appreciate something until it's gone. That might be our health, might be our friendship, a friend that died, or it might be an opportunity to really get on the ball here as far as serving Jesus till he comes again. Lift up your head, stand up, for our redemption draweth nigh. So there's people in hospitals right now that say, well, if I get out, I'm going to really not only love Jesus, but as I was talking a while ago, love without a plan is a wish to really do something with my hands and feet, or my talents, time, talent, treasure, and testimony, and use it for Jesus. He'll love you, and when you pass from this life to another, you're going to be thrilled that you were faithful even unto the end.
Thank